Alara Voss had learned, long ago, not to expect kindness. In the Blackthorn packhouse, kindness was a currency she had never been allowed to hold. She woke before dawn to light the fires, carried water until her arms shook, and ate whatever scraps were left after the higher-ranked wolves had taken their fill. She was 22 years old, and for as long as she could remember, she had been called only one thing behind her back, and sometimes to her face: the cursed Omega. The story was always the same, repeated by every elder who wanted an excuse to look away from her suffering. Alara's mother had died giving birth to her, on a night when the moon had turned the color of blood. In wolf tradition, a blood moon birth was said to carry a shadow, a mark of bad fortune that followed the child for life. No one had ever proven this. No one had ever needed to. The story was useful, and useful stories did not require proof. So Alara grew up alone. Other pups her age were given names, ranks, and futures. She was given a broom and a warning to stay out of sight. She never shifted in front of others, afraid that even her wolf form would be mocked. She never spoke unless spoken to. She had built her life around a single, quiet rule: make yourself small enough, and the pain will stay small too. It was on an ordinary autumn morning, with frost still clinging to the windows, that everything changed. Word had spread through Blackthorn for days that the Alpha King was coming. King Draven Ashford ruled over the 5 territories, a stretch of land so vast that most Blackthorn wolves would never see its borders in their lifetime. He was said to be strong beyond measure, sharp-eyed, and utterly untouchable. Every unmated alpha female in the territories had tried, at some point, to catch his attention. None had succeeded. His wolf, it was whispered, had never bowed to anyone. Alara had no reason to care about any of this. Kings did not notice servant girls. She had a tray to carry and floors to scrub, and the arrival of a king changed neither of those facts. The great hall was crowded when she entered that afternoon, carrying a tray of food toward the high table where the pack elders sat with their important guest. She kept her eyes down, as she always did, weaving carefully between the gathered wolves. She did not look at the king. She had learned not to look at anyone. But halfway across the hall, something happened that no one, including Alara, could explain. King Draven's wolf, a presence so commanding that grown alphas had been known to lower their eyes in its shadow, suddenly went still. Then, in front of the entire hall, in front of every noble and elder and guard, it lowered itself to the ground. Not a nod, not a moment of respect. It was a full, unmistakable bow, the kind offered only to someone of the highest importance. The hall fell into stunned silence. Draven felt his own wolf move without his permission, and for the first time in his life, he did not understand himself. He rose from his seat, confusion, and something sharper flashing across his face. His eyes searched the hall and landed on the source of his wolf's sudden devotion. A servant girl, thin, quiet, dressed in a plain gray dress, standing frozen with a tray in her hands. "Who is she?" Draven asked, his voice cutting through the silence. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, an older wolf named Corwin, stepped forward quickly. "She is no one of importance, my king. A servant, Alara Voss. She was born under unfortunate circumstances." "Unfortunate circumstances," Draven repeated slowly, his gaze never leaving her. "My wolf does not bow to unfortunate circumstances." Alara felt every eye in the hall turn to her, and for the first time, she could not make herself small enough to disappear. Her hands trembled around the tray. She had spent her whole life being invisible, and now, in the space of a single breath, she was the only thing anyone could see. Draven crossed the hall toward her, and the crowd parted like water. Up close, he was taller than she expected, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He studied her carefully, not with pity, not with mockery, but with something that looked almost like recognition. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Alara," she whispered. "Alara Voss." He said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned to the elders, and his voice, when it came, was quiet in a way that made the entire hall hold its breath. "I want to know everything about her. Now." The elders scrambled to control the story, just as they always had. They spoke of the blood moon, of misfortune, of a curse passed down through her mother's blood. Draven listened, his expression unreadable, until finally he raised a hand for silence. "I have hunted rogue wolves who threatened entire villages," he said. "I have faced enemies who wished to burn my kingdom to ash. In all my years, I have never once seen my wolf bow to anything, yet it bowed to her the moment she entered this hall. If there is a curse here, elders, I do not think it belongs to her." That night, unable to rest, Draven called for the eldest historian in his personal court, a wolf named Master Yorick, who had spent his life studying bloodlines and ancient pack law. Draven described what had happened, and Yorick's face changed as he listened, curiosity sharpening into something close to wonder. "There is an old bloodline," Yorick explained carefully, "one that has not appeared in 3 generations. It is said that those born of it carry a presence so pure, so deeply tied to fate itself, that no alpha wolf can resist acknowledging them. Not out of weakness, my king, but out of instinct. Ancient wolves called them true mates of destiny, not merely of chance. If this girl carries that blood, then your wolf did not make a mistake tonight. It made a choice it was always meant to make." Draven sat with this information long into the night, and something inside him, something that had been closed off for years, began to open. The next morning, he sought Alara out. She was in the kitchen, scrubbing pots with her sleeves pushed up, when she looked up to find the Alpha King standing in the doorway. She nearly dropped the pot in her hands. "You do not need to do that anymore," Draven said. "I have work to finish," she replied quietly, unsure if this was some kind of test. "Not this kind of work." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "Alara, I want to understand what happened to you here. I want to hear your story, not the one the elders told me." For the first time in years, someone was asking her to speak, not commanding her to stay silent. Slowly, carefully, she told him. She told him about the years of being denied a rank, of eating alone, of being blamed for a tragedy that was never her fault. She told him about the loneliness that had settled so deep into her bones that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope for anything better. Draven listened to every word without interrupting, and by the time she finished, his jaw was tight with a quiet, controlled anger. "No one will treat you this way again," he said. "Not while I stand beside you." Over the following days, Draven made his intentions clear to the entire pack. He walked with Alara through the territory, sat beside her at meals, and made certain that every wolf in Blackthorn understood that the girl they had once scorned was now under his protection. Slowly, cautiously, Alara began to change. She stood a little taller, she spoke a little louder. She allowed herself, for the first time, to imagine a future that did not involve scrubbing floors in silence. But not everyone welcomed this change. The elders who had built their authority on the story of her curse understood exactly what her rise would mean for them. If Alara was truly the king's mate, if the old bloodline was real, then their years of cruelty would not be forgiven. Pack law was clear about the mistreatment of a king's true mate, and the punishment for such crimes was severe. Fear, more than anything else, drove them toward a desperate plan. A hunting ceremony was already scheduled, a tradition meant to honor the king's visit, held deep within the forest that bordered Blackthorn territory. The elders saw their opportunity. They arranged for Alara to be guided along a separate trail, away from the main hunting party, where a group of loyal but misled wolves would ensure she never returned. They called it an accident in advance, already preparing the story they would tell. Alara, unaware of the danger, agreed to walk the quieter trail when Corwin suggested it, believing it was simply part of the ceremony. She was almost half a mile from the others when she heard movement in the trees, low and deliberate, circling rather than passing by. Fear rose in her chest, old and familiar, the same fear that had followed her through every year of her childhood. But this time, she did not simply try to make herself small. She thought of Draven's voice, steady and sure. "No one will treat you this way again." She began to move quickly back toward the main trail, her heart pounding. Draven felt it before he understood it, a sharp, pulling instinct that told him something was deeply wrong. His wolf surged forward with a force he could not control, and he broke away from the hunting party without explanation, running faster than he ever had in his life. Every step felt like it carried the weight of everything he had only just begun to understand about what she meant to him. He reached the narrow trail just as the circling wolves closed in around her. Ilara had backed against a fallen tree, refusing to run further, refusing to disappear the way she once might have. When Draven arrived, his wolf did not hesitate. He placed himself between her and the danger, and the wolves who had been sent to harm her, faced now with the full fury of their king, faltered and scattered into the trees. It was over quickly. No one was seriously harmed, but the truth of what had happened could no longer be hidden. Draven turned to Ilara, his hands gentle despite the fire still burning in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, breathless, more stunned by his arrival than by the danger she had just escaped. "You came," she whispered. "I will always come," he said. The following morning, Draven called the entire pack together in the great hall, the same hall where his wolf had first bowed before her. He stood beside Ilara, no longer hiding his intentions, and addressed every wolf gathered there. "For years, this pack allowed cruelty to hide behind a story," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "A story built to excuse the mistreatment of an innocent girl. My wolf recognized the truth the moment it saw her, even before I did. Ilara Voss is not cursed. She carries a bloodline older and rarer than any of you understood, and she has endured more strength and grace than most wolves in this hall will ever be tested with." He turned to the elders, whose faces had gone pale. "Your attempt to silence that truth, permanently, will not be forgotten or forgiven." The elders were stripped of their titles that same day and banished from Blackthorn territory. Their years of quiet cruelty finally answered. The pack, many of whom had simply followed the elders' lead without question, watched the transformation with a mixture of shame and disbelief. In the weeks that followed, Draven formally claimed Ilara before the full council of the 5 territories, a bond recognized not only by law, but by every wolf who had witnessed his wolf's devotion from the very first moment. Ilara Voss, once dismissed as the cursed Omega, was crowned Luna of the 5 territories, standing beside the king who had refused to let the world's cruel stories decide her worth. On the evening of her coronation, Ilara stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the lights of the territory that had once cast her aside. The wind was cool, and for the first time in her life, there was no fear in it, only possibility. Draven joined her quietly, resting a hand over hers on the railing. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. She thought of the years of silence, the broom, the empty seat at every table. Then she thought of the moment a king's wolf had bowed before her, not because of her rank or her past, but because of who she truly was. "None," she said, smiling for what felt like the first time in her life. "I am finally home." And for the girl the world had once called cursed, home was no longer a place. It was standing beside someone who had seen her worth before she ever believed it herself.